It's a little different tonight. I know that probably some of you coming along might be a bit surprised to see myself as a layperson sitting up here tonight instead of one of the monks or Ajahn Brahm, but you should know that we are now into our rains retreat, and as is usual in the Theravadan tradition, our monks will retreat now for approximately 3 months. So over the next little while we have a program of speakers that are going to come along and give various aspects of or an insight into Buddhism over this coming time. And there'll be many and varied, but you'll be able to see who's coming each week, and they will be announced again. I think towards the end of the night I know who's speaking next week, so I'll leave that to later on because I want to introduce him properly a little bit later on. But over the coming weeks, we'll have it on our website, the various speakers, and they will be announced, of course, with the regular announcements. Now, in terms of the meditation tonight, what I'd like to do is to just run a normal meditation. But if you are happy to just go along with what you normally do, I'm very happy for you to do that. But for those that are new or would like some guidance, I would like you now just to make yourself comfortable on your seat, make your back nice and straight in that way that you get that nice curve in the back. If you can get that just right and get your head just pointing quite nicely to the ceiling and your ears up and down in the right way so that your head doesn't loll around, you can actually sit quite comfortably for a long time, just getting the right energy into your body that way. So closing your eyes now and just letting your tongue rest lightly against the palate. Close your mouth and breathing through the nose. And just start to become aware of your breath. Just needing to becoming aware of the breath going in and the breath going out. And I'd like you to do that without making any commentary on the breath at all. So that's just to give yourself a bare knowing, just to know what the breath is doing, whether it's whereabouts it is in its cycle. And I would like you just to continue that exercise through until about 5 minutes before the end. And then I'm going to ask you to let the breath go and just watch to see what happens from there. And I'm doing that advisedly because that little exercise will be part of tonight's talk. So just building up the concentration by watching the breath and just keeping your attention on the breath. And as soon as you realise that your mind has wandered, you're off thinking about something else, just to bring your attention back to the breath. In that way we're building up an element of concentration. As you're moving into this process, so you will notice how your mind starts to calm and settle, tranquilise. Now, as your mind is settling down, your breath will also be just settling. So just keep pace with the breath as it settles and the mind settles. Just allowing your mind just to be tranquilized. But tranquilized with a knowing, with awareness. So if you're finding that your mind is wandering off somewhere else, just stop yourself and come back to the breath. Just do it very calmly, very gently. Just the bare awareness of the breath. So again, just staying with the breath and just noticing the breath becoming more shallow, more easy, and the mind too just becoming more relaxed and more concentrated just on the breath itself. And just allowing the whole process just to settle, letting the mind settle into stillness. With just an anchor on the breath. Now we've been using the breath as like an anchor point, in a sense to calibrate the mind, just to notice how it's settling, how it's becoming more peaceful, more relaxed. What I'm going to ask you to do in a minute, though, is to let go the breath. And when you do that, I would like you then just to notice what comes in and out of your mind, just to stay with the awareness and keep your eyes closed. Just keep the meditation going. Just to notice what comes in and out. You can do that now. Just let go of the breath if you like. Just see what's there. If there's a thought comes, you can maybe just notice the thought. See what happens when you notice the thought. If there's nothing there at all, you can just be aware of nothing. Just the stillness that's there. Perhaps if there's confusion, it might be a question like, what's he talking about? Just to notice that. The important thing to do here, though, is just to stay present and just to know what your mind is doing, just what's happening inside your mind. If you like, you can always go back to the breath. Just go back to the breath and sharpen up your mind again if you like. Just to bring a bit more concentration there. In a minute I'm going to ring the bell. And when I do that, if you take something like about 3 or 4 or 5 breaths more before you finish your meditation. But as you're doing that, it's usually a very good idea just to contemplate what has happened for you, especially over the last 5 minutes or so, just to do a stock take of what you noticed, what you saw. There we go. I trust you're all back with us now. Back inside the room. Tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about consciousness. And I'm doing this from a standpoint of really what I've been involved with in my practice over the last really from the time that I've started practicing meditation, which was quite a number of years ago now. But especially since 2005, when I actually learnt the process of hypnosis. And in fact, I've been involved in a hypnotherapy practice for the last 5 or maybe 10 years, something of that order. And I would like to just share with you some of the experience that I've had with that, especially in the way that I've seen that relates to the consciousness that we all have, and also just the way that it also relates to meditation, just the very big difference that there is between hypnosis and or when someone is hypnotised and the practice of doing meditation, just the awareness that we have when we are actually meditating, and just the difference in that. And from that viewpoint, then I would like to just continue on just to see how all these conditions of our life do get embedded in our consciousness, because that's quite a mystery, isn't it? It's very interesting for us to look at, just to notice why we are the way that we are, why we have the conditions in place in our minds and in our bodies in the way that they are conditioned into us. They can be, I operate in this world as a man, an Australian man, of my particular vintage now, and that's particularly how I see the world, how I kind of interact with the world. I probably share a lot of my knowledge that I have about this world, the same as what you would have. So my conditionings are it's a very independent thing. The way that I see the world is probably slightly different than yours, maybe not too different. But when you think maybe of someone that may be born in perhaps Iraq or in one of the more troubled spots of the world, just the troubles and the tribulations that they have in their lives and the way that they see the world, how they're conditioned, just how what they see and how the conditioning that they get in their lives, how that embeds into their consciousness, and just what all that really means for us. And I'm going to try and sort of tie that and relate that back to what the Buddha taught, and just how the Buddha was encouraging us to really to get to know our minds very well. And of course that was what I was just practicing to do there with that meditation that we were doing. It's a very good way to start a meditation practice like that, where you've got an anchor of the mind, where you can, an anchor of the breath rather, where you can use the breath as like a calibration point, just to see where your mind is, just to see whether it's agitated or whether it's still, just whether it's confused, whether it's frightened, fearful. All these conditions we can really at any given time just really look and see if we've got that ability to self-reflect, if we know what self-reflection is. And of course meditation is such a big thing in that regard, just where we are able to look back on ourselves. And in fact it's a bit like the mind looking back on the mind, almost like Ajahn Sumedho, a mutual friend with Venerable Amarantho is Ajahn Sumedho. I know he used to talk about taking the eye out and looking back on yourself. It's actually quite just an interesting way to contemplate. But that's in fact what we can do with self-reflection. We can actually look directly into our mind and just to notice what's happening. So just how these conditions come into play is a very interesting thing for us to notice. And what I'm talking about here, of course, is just the conditions that come into play that are conscious, and that's conscious conditioning is really interesting enough and probably hard enough for us to see anyway. Just the way that our culture conditions us, our families condition us. Just the way that that we work as genders, how that conditions us as well. But all that is one thing, but then it pales when you kind of look at what happens to us subconsciously. Just what happens when the subconscious is also brought into play, because there's lots of stuff in our minds that is unconscious, that we don't even know about. That we might certainly know the conscious conditioned stuff, but then to get to know the unconscious stuff, how do we do that? And how do we come to understand it? How can we even begin to unravel all these things that are there in our mind to notice and see? And of course that's really where this hypnosis practice sort of comes to the fore a little bit too, where we can actually use hypnosis to help us understand sometimes that unconscious conditioning that we do have. And of course that brings into play past lives. Past lives is a very big thing in Buddhism. I'm particularly enamoured with them. I do believe in past lives. I think that past lives are as real as they can be. I'm not really still quite sure what a past life is, but to that extent I don't really know what this life is either. This life is still a mystery really to me to come to understand, but I know that I'm Dennis and I know that I sort of operate in a certain way. So understanding and unravelling these things is a very important thing to do, to be able to sort of get back right to the very basics of these things, so we can see where all this thing, where this universe that we're all involved, this mysterious universe that we're all involved with, this mysterious life that we're all involved with, just to start to get some idea of just what we're doing here, what we, how we are interacting with our world. So with the past lives, I think that I've had some very interesting people come through my rooms over the years, just to noticing what they, what people come for. Because people usually come because they've got some sort of an issue. It may be a blockage that they might have, something that they don't really understand about themselves. In some cases it's perhaps about relationships, why they can't all the time maybe why they sabotage relationships, or it can be many and varied things that people come for. But usually when they do come, I ask people to give me some idea of what they want to find out about themselves, and then when we go into the hypnosis process, and as a hypnotist, what you would tend to do to get people into the trance that's required, and I'm sort of saying this so that you do know the difference between when someone is hypnotised and they're actually in a trance, because they are, in fact, their minds are being disassociated from their normal consciousness. So in effect, it's a little bit like our dream state at night. So what we do as a hypnotist, we might try and talk in a way that confuses people or confuse the conscious mind. So it's off kind of thinking about something that's confusing them. We could try and bore it, just continually go on, and finally the mind gets bored and it just sort of drifts off and goes to attend to something else, very similar to what happens in meditation, I might say that one. And the third thing that we usually use is something like a shock tactic. So it might be something where you're shocked, and it's a very interesting thing actually with that, as far as that shocking process goes, because all these methods will cause the body or cause the mind to dissociate. It dissociates from the present and from the conscious mind. I was just going to say that it is very interesting, just even when we talk about someone going into shock, maybe with after a car accident or something like that, that this is in effect really a hypnotised state. And it's just interesting to know too that when someone is in that state, if ever you come across someone that's been in an accident and they're in a state of shock, you can really talk directly there to someone's subconscious mind there. It might be even something as simple as saying stop that bleeding. You could instruct the mind to say that, stop that bleeding, and whatever the body can do, it will subconsciously do that, because the conscious mind is not there in its in the way to stop the process. I mean, I'm not saying, of course, that it's going to close up the artery or the vein that's pulsing right up, but there is that possibility of sort of tensing. The subconscious mind can do that. Does that when it's in a state like that, when it's dissociated. So when you are in this dissociated state, there is that possibility to see quite deeply into what is there in the unconscious at times. And I would say that probably out of the people that I see, there would be maybe 8 people out of 10 will probably be able to see what I would call a past life. So just going through the process, they might just remember something that's associated with the problem that they're having. It usually is that we usually use a little hook to hook that idea out, like especially an emotional hook, to hook it out of the subconscious. And then the person will generally start telling a story or creating a narrative around what it is that they're feeling. Now, I know that very often these narratives that come are quite often just confabulated, especially if the process that we're using is just an intellectual. If they're just intellectualising what they're talking about, oftentimes it will be a confabulated story that would come out. And but that, on the whole, I don't think matters too much, because it's still a story that's being told that this person is seeing from inside their own subconscious mind. But it gets even more interesting when there is an emotional content to whatever the person might have as well, because then the person has a possibility of being able to experience the emotional state at the same time, and then of course it does become very real for the person that's experiencing this or telling the story. So as I was saying, that's maybe 8 out of 10 might be able to tell me a past life story. There might be about 6 to 7, I'd say, the people out of that 10 that might believe the story themselves. And then I think, as you gradually get down the scale a little bit, you can. There's probably a lesser amount again that might be able to sort of check a fact from a past life story. Maybe just to check 1 or 2 facts. There would be a few people that can do that, but then there are the exceptional people, and I've had 1 or 2 of those in my practice over the years. The exceptional people that can actually remember a past life and then have it checked out completely with the written record after, which is quite an astonishing thing to happen. But certainly there's one person that I've had that was able to remember his name, remember his wife's name, remember children's name for a past life, remember what he was doing in the past life, and then able to go back into the record and actually confirm all these things, to actually find these names in the record. This person was able to go and visit his own grave, able to go and visit his wife's grave. It's a very interesting thing, isn't it, to think, how can this happen? But these stories are there, and they're well researched. And it's not only just me that's doing that. I mean, there's many people over the years that have been doing this hypnosis, and bringing stories out like this. I can remember there was a hypnotist called Peter Ramster, who was a hypnotist from Sydney, and he actually found 4 women, Australian women, out of 1,000 people that he'd hypnotised. He found 4 that had this ability to be able to tell their story and make the facts checkable. And he actually, this is about 25 years ago, I suppose now, because I remember I just came across this television program he made one Saturday afternoon. I never watched television on Saturday, but I just happened to sort of put the TV on this Saturday afternoon, and here was this story that I put a tape in and managed to capture. And it's regaled the monks here over the years for it's a video that's quite often played here at the centre, because it's such a compelling story. Because in that story there was one lady, for instance, who remembered her life as a doctor, and she was able to remember so vividly about this life. She was able to sort of draw pictures of the school that she learnt in Aberdeen, and they took her back to this school. She was able to, it was no longer a medical school, of course, and it had been changed around quite a lot. In fact, most of it had been pulled down over 100 years ago, but she was still able to reconstruct on a plan just what was there, and they were able to confirm this from looking at past archival architectural records. And it was really quite an amazing thing to see this woman so clearly retell her story of that life, even signatures of this. It was a man. He was a man in that life, a doctor, a man that actually was living that life as a doctor back in the 1800s. But these stories, they do. This woman, and I'm thinking too now of another lady from one of Peter Ramster's cases too. There, where he took this lady back to a chateau in France, and to see the emotional connection that this woman had with this place that she was involved in was really quite telling. And I notice that too with the people that I see too, when there is an emotional connection. You know, somebody might be just going along, just telling a story about a life, and it's just da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but then all of a sudden it'll be and the emotion comes and the tears come, and and then it becomes very real. It's like, you know, it becomes a real memory for the person involved, as it did with this woman who was visiting this chateau in France. And I just want to segue to just slightly out of that for the moment. Now that I'm talking about emotions and feelings in these kinds of things, just to talk about Venerable Amarantho, who's sitting over here on my left-hand side tonight. Venerable Amarantho has been a friend now for a few years. He's a great friend of our society here. But he is a monk that actually specialises in I think identifying. I'd say that'd be probably true. Identifying the emotional blind spots that we might have inside ourselves. He talks about it as the shadow side of things. And we're very fortunate to have him back again this year over the Rains retreat period, where he's going to be running a few workshops and that again. And I know that his workshops are basically filling up quite fast. But I do know there's a few spots on his retreat that he's going to be doing in October. So if anyone's interested to be involved with that, you wouldn't find a better coach, I think, than Ajahn Amarantho there to be able to help you through some of these things, because indeed it's whether you're using hypnosis or whether you're using just the meditation to identify these things, it's these little tensions that get locked inside us. They get locked and they stay inside us, and these are the things oftentimes, especially when they're unconscious, that push us round so much. They push us round and we don't even know that they are pushing us around. It's so it can be very liberating to be able to identify these things. Certainly with meditation, it is another great way to be able to identify these little hooks that we have inside that sort of stop us from becoming really, really peaceful. And I guess you could put it another way too, that stop us from becoming completely sane, like the Buddha. And in this way, I'm talking in terms of the Buddha being the ultimate sane person, who can see right through to the core of the truth, the core of the absolute truth. And I'm seeing those of us that are reborn or born into this world all the time as being, somewhat stuck, not quite sane, just that little bit insane, really. I mean, we're all sort of up to a point normal. We're all sort of, none of us in this room are probably very likely tonight anyway to get sort of locked away in a mental institution or that. But nonetheless, even if we go there, you're sort of brought up to a level where you're sort of normal, and then we're all sort of out again. And here we are, we're all got our own points of view and different ways that we see this world. But I would put that point of view anyway, that the true sanity really, though, comes with the enlightenment that the Buddha is talking about. So it's beholden on all of us really to try and work through those issues so that we can let them go and sort of understand the truth of the peacefulness that can be there to be seen. Now I wanted to just go a little further and just talk about consciousness in terms of the way the Buddha talked about it as well. Just talking about it in terms of what we call in Buddhism the 5 aggregates, or the 5 khandhas. the five khandhas are, and again just khandha meaning aggregate. So the Buddha's talking here about aggregations. Aggregations means building up, things building up. And I should want to start just to tell you that the fifth khandha that the Buddha talked about, when he talked about these khandhas, the Buddha was a wonderful list maker. He used to always make these lists of things to act as like ways of entering into the mind, into understanding the mind. So he had a lot of lists, and there's probably lists for each temperament. Every one of us that have got a particular temperament could find a list that the Buddha would be able to show us and sort of give us an entry point into our minds, into the way that we think and the way that we see. And this is sort of important for me, this list of aggregations, the list of 5 khandhas. But the fifth khandha is actually pure consciousness. So what the Buddha was talking about here, he was sort of saying that it is possible to isolate that fifth khandha, to isolate and actually see what pure consciousness is. And I certainly think that that's right as well. You can actually see what pure consciousness is. And I think it's a very important thing to do, to be able to sort of see what this is. And I've found the other way, I think, a very interesting way to explain what this means, because when you get down to this pure conscious level here, you can actually see another very important thing that the Buddha talked about. The Buddha talked about no self, and I'm sure you all would be familiar with that, this idea of anatta, or no self. And that's quite a difficult thing, I think, for us to understand in Buddhism. Just what did the Buddha mean by no self, that there is no self there? Because in fact, I know that in Buddhism we probably depart from most of the other religions in talking about this no self, because it even goes past the soul. Because what the Buddha's saying there is that he's not even positing a soul. So there's really not too much, when you think of it like this, there's not too much to hang your hat on when you start thinking like this. So understanding this fifth aggregate, this is what this pure consciousness is, becomes a very important thing to try and work through to understand. And the other day I was listening to the ABC radio, and they were talking about the budget, and what this chap was talking about, he was just saying that how governments do tend to trick us sometimes by introducing more taxes for us, but they do it in a way that's where they don't sort of refer directly to the taxes. They might talk about a levy, there's going to be a levy on the rich, or it might be a Medicare levy or something like that, something that's reasonably palatable for us to be able to accept and understand. And governments will do this all the time, to take it away. But to take away the idea of just plain taxing us. So what this fellow was saying, though, is that when they do that, though, they're doing it, he was pointing out that it is a trick, because money itself has this quality of, he calls it fungible. He says money is fungible, and I've since learnt that that's actually a term that's used quite regularly in economics. Fungibility means that something can be interchanged. You can take it here and put it here, or swap it round, and it always means the same. It's got the same value. You can take this and put it over there, and it's got the same value if you put it over there. It's fungible. So, when all the money that the governments bring in, and they bring it into consolidated revenue, it's all money. So you can never ever really tell that this particular bit of money here is, levy money, or this bit here is ordinary tax money, because it's all fungible. Now, consciousness is exactly the same thing. Consciousness, I think, is very fungible. And I'll sort of, just from that point on, I'll just sort of come back over the other khandhas, just to sort of to show you how it sort of comes up and how we, in effect, get tricked by consciousness. probably in a similar way to what politicians do when they try and trick us with taxes or try and get us on side with some taxes that they may want to bring in. So the coming back from the pure consciousness of mind, when you can actually to see that, I'll talk a little bit more about that after, but when you can actually start to see what pure consciousness is, you can notice then that when consciousness moves, and as soon as there's any movement at all in the mind, as soon as you notice the mind moving at all, and this is important for us all to sort of look at and notice, you start to see that there's a perception that forms. So perception is that's actually the third khandha. The fourth khandha is actually the movement, just seeing the movement of mind go, but then it moves into perception, which is the third khandha. And then from perception, that khandha will usually move to feeling. So then there's feelings will come into existence. So all this is coming through this process of aggregation. So we're starting off with just pure consciousness, which is totally fungible, and then it's kind of it's the mind's moving, so the consciousness is aggregating. When it starts to aggregate, and then it moves to a perception, and then from the perception it starts to move to a feeling, and then the fifth khandha, what the Buddha talked about the first khandha, the very first of the lot, is actually the physicality, and he had that the first khandha was really everything in the universe that is physical. So I've always found that very interesting thing just in itself too, because out of all those 5 khandhas there's 20% that is allocated to each khandha, but the Buddha here has got 20% allocated into the physical, which includes the whole universe, our bodies, the buildings, everything that we can imagine that is physical. We can allocate to that 20%. And then the other 80% that he's got is all mental. So what the Buddha is talking about here is that there's most of the energy from the world, actually, the energy that creates everything comes from the mental, comes from our mental world. And so just going back down the khandhas, you've got the whole physical world that we all interact with. And then you come back to the feelings, and the feelings it's interesting, the feelings will usually, especially in animals and human beings, it seems that feelings, when they aggregate in the mind, they always want to find a physical dimension to show themselves in, so that they will, locate themselves usually in a body, and that's probably why I would say that's especially emotional stuff, when that does get anchored sort of firmly inside us, sometimes it's very difficult to shift. Why you need someone like Venerable Amaranto over here to be a coach in those sorts of regards. So feeling being the second khandha, that after the physical, and then the third one is perception. Once that comes back to the perception, and the second one is the movement of mind, the mind moving, and then the fifth khandha is this pure consciousness. Now I think pure consciousness is really it's something that we all get a little bit frightened of, I think, or a little bit sort of nervous about just actually noticing to see. But this is a very, very, I think a very, it's not an easy thing to see. I shouldn't say that, but I think that especially the meditators that are here at our centre, I think there'd be many people that would really know consciousness very well, but maybe for one reason or another don't want to necessarily acknowledge just what that consciousness is. But this consciousness is it's basically just the stillness of your mind. You can, whenever I think about this, I think about it in terms of saying that consciousness is when the mind is still, just that still presence that you can experience, because it's a very visceral thing that you can it's a tangible thing that you can notice. It's not nothing. There's a sensation that actually goes with this consciousness that you can actually know. And but just isolating it down means that you do need to be able to isolate what that means. And in actual fact, what I would like to do is just to help you, I wanted just to read you a little poem that I wrote. And this is really by way of trying to help understand how we can calibrate ourselves so that we can actually get to notice this consciousness. And I think sometimes just hearing a poem, or even when I sit down to write these poems too, I find that the words you've got to find are really quite interesting. The words very meaningful, very honest, truthful words that sometimes can help. Anyway, I'll just read you this poem that allows you to that I think will allow you to maybe see where I'm sort of going to with this, to try and understand and isolate just exactly what this pure consciousness is. So this is a calibration of life. When I compare my experience with what is good and bad, I am noticing a difference to make me sad or glad. I objectify things and act depending on what I perceive to suit me best based on what I believe. Love and hate can both keep my heart rate high, while birth and death can bring a teary eye. While an extrovert may make an introvert look shy, age may slow, while the young will reach for the sky. Fame will condition infamy if I try to glorify my name, while loss may bring heartache and make me strive for gain. Roughness will generate smooth as an experience to try. Riches can make me happy, while poverty may make me cry. Life's dualities feed back difference for me to discriminate, my ongoing conditioning deciding what it is I appreciate. Popular views will tell me what's best to accumulate, perhaps an oblivious life lived without truth in mind to calibrate. How to decide what is truth's bottom line? Only the heart of this moment shows the stillness so prime. This stillness lets me see knowing beyond my intentions, where space always resonates with past and future tensions. This infinite space rings to give pure consciousness a mould, to energise my life and provide a story to be told. Calibration is essential to understand my being, to see the right pathway and then enable my freeing. Calibrating a scale provides a reference datum for an accurate reading that must be verbatim, read directly from the benchmark set, so I know that a truthful standard is being met. Using stillness and space for this touchstone's perspective lets the tensions unravel without being subjective. Space with its stillness and pure consciousness known, the first and last condition that the universe has grown. When this clarity comes, freedom's pathway becomes clear. The reference provides discipline, which at first may seem austere. But as the fullness and richness of the moment appears, the direction is obvious, moving past all my fears. Calibration has given me the chance to know the dis-ease that lifetimes of conditioning can grow, relative truths which are bound to disappoint, ongoing lives lived without a reference point. Finally, the perspective seen using wisdom's treasure allows a calibration back to the stillness as a measure. Then right insight into the unconditioned beyond space and time will bring an enlightened view to give me freedom sublime. So, just with those words, a few words there, I'm trying to just show just how it is important to to be able to calibrate ourselves, to be able to pinpoint and isolate these different states. And certainly it is possible to see right across those whole 5 khandhas. You know, it's very obvious that we can see our bodies, the first khandha. Feelings too are fairly easy to notice, although, you know, oftentimes it's very difficult just to know. If a feeling's quite subtle, it can be quite a difficult thing to experience, and you really do need sometimes to be able to have a calibration point even for that. But just sort of moving back from the feelings and into the perceptions, just noticing a perception. It is possible just to stop yourself, just as you've perceived, you know, I'm seeing this way, and you can actually stop and change that if you would like. Change your perspective. And then just getting back into back to where the poem's sort of pointing to, just the movement of mind itself, just to notice when the mind is moving. But then when the mind stops, when the mind is very still, this pure consciousness will just appear. And for those of us that have, especially following Ajahn Brahm's teaching, those that have been following the jhana process that he teaches, that's a very real way of actually noticing this conditioned process, because the jhana state itself will certainly bring to mind pure consciousness. That is particularly a state when the body itself can drop away, can drop right away, and just leave the pure consciousness of mind just singing there without any thoughts or any confusion around it. So from that point of view, you can use jhana practice like that to really isolate what the pure consciousness is. I mean, that's not the only way to do it, of course. It is very possible to sort of sneak up on this pure consciousness of conditioning. You can, you still need the very still mind, develop the still mind that Ajahn Brahm sort of teaches and talks about, but it is possible too just to in a way sort of sneak up on it without that sort of unification or the suddenness that a jhana practice might might bring you. I suppose that's the beauty of the way that Ajahn Brahm teaches, because the jhana is when one kind of falls into, or sort of the mind transitions. It's like a phase transition. It sort of drops from one state to another, and it does it so suddenly. It becomes obvious. That's very obvious for people to notice and see, and then the pure conscious mind is just sort of sitting there singing for you, so you know exactly what it is. But this other way is just as valid. You can sort of sneak up on it and gradually kind of bring it into your knowing, into your existence, and start to work with it. But it is important to get to know what this pure consciousness is, because it's really the mindfulness of that pure consciousness that then allows you to start to notice when the mind itself will actually stop. So as much as the mind will bring pure consciousness into existence when it stops moving, when there's no more movement of mind, but indeed the process goes further than that too, because consciousness, pure consciousness itself, is still just a condition, another condition of mind. And if that's observed with enough mindfulness, when you can actually maybe go on a retreat or build up a certain momentum towards that stillness, then it's possible to actually observe that pure consciousness and actually see it finish. And then you're starting to see what the Buddha saw, just the unconditioned, when you're sort of seeing consciousness finished, consciousness no longer there in your mind, you're starting to see this unconditioned state. And there's not really too much you can say about the unconditioned itself. It's sort of it's just an oxymoron anyway to be able to sort of to speak about it, because it's just something that is beyond time and space and any thought or consciousness anyway. But it's very interesting that you can know it still. This can be known. And that's really the joy of what the Buddha was showing to us. He was talking all the time there about getting to know the mind, being able to sort of go past these conditions, to know what the conditions of mind are, so that we can actually transcend them, go past them, see past them. And when we can actually see past what the mind presents to us, and that means making your mind still enough to be able to let that process take place for you, well then you can actually know what that unconditioned is. The Buddha, of course, he was saying that we all should strive to understand this. He was saying, one of his teachings was that he would say the house of self is on fire, but we're addicted to the flames. And it sort of comes back to that question of the politicians and fungibility. When you can actually start to see this pure consciousness, you can see the fungible nature of it, and you can then see how we trick ourselves. We trick ourselves into believing the perceptions and the feelings that come from those perceptions every time that our mind moves. We can start to see how we've been habituated into this way that we are. And it's when you start to see and understand the mind like that, then you can start to really see what the Buddha meant when he talked about anatta, or no self. Because this process is a process of movement. The mind is a process of moving, and moving up through those 5 khandhas, up from the pure consciousness to the perception, to the feelings, back up to the body itself and the physicality that's there in itself. And in fact, once you start to know that pure consciousness, you can start to see that everywhere. The pure consciousness exists all around. You can see how it sort of goes through me, it goes through you, it goes through the whole universe. The whole universe itself is built on this consciousness. The whole universe is, in effect, if you like, conscious. Even the scientists that are looking out into the stars, into the vast voids of space, is seeing that with the consciousness, this fungible consciousness that's underpinning everything, underpinning and forming this world and the universe that we all see. This consciousness is a very, very important thing for us to realise and understand. Probably the last thing that I'd just like to say about this is just how once we start to get this stillness or this still consciousness going, it is very important then to be able to sort of bring it in close to us so that we can actually start seeing the world through this new filter of pure consciousness. And when you actually start to do that, when you bring it up close, so that you, rather than even just seeing, just as we were doing in the meditation before there, when you're looking, maybe you could see the stillness between thoughts. And in fact, when you're doing that meditation, you might even, as Ajahn Brahm often does here, he'll sort of slow his voice down and say, can you see the stillness between my words? And you can practice and be with that to be able to sort of start to get a feeling for what this stillness on this pure consciousness that ends up there actually is. But once you start to see the world through that filter, then the very natural things like compassion start to arise for you, because you can see that we are all interconnected. This interconnectedness is just so obvious then. The consciousness joins and binds us all. It keeps us all together. It is, we are in relationship with one another. And then just calling on Ajahn Brahm's wisdom again with this, just that relationship where he talks about any relationship. I know I often do the weddings with Ajahn Brahm. We often marry people, and he always when he's speaking to the bride and groom, he'll sort of talk about being in relationship together and what that means. It's no longer you and it's no longer me. It's always us. And that's so with any relationship, whether it's a relationship between us here or the relationship we have with Perth or Australia or the relationship we have with the universe. It's the same thing, because this consciousness, this fungible consciousness is connecting us all. We are all interconnected. And when that once that interconnectedness starts to be seen so clearly, then natural compassion will start to arise in us. You will feel it just empathy and compassion just naturally goes. And also the sympathetic joy, the joy that will start to arrive from just noticing the beauty of this, just the beauty of the truth of it is just so uplifting and overwhelming that this joy just naturally arises. And the love that comes from that, the metta, the ability to be loving and kind, just naturally is there, as well as just the other thing the last thing, of course, it does is just balances. It just balances our mind so that we're, totally in check. So these, what we call in Buddhism, the four divine abidings, just naturally arise when we are seeing the world through that stillness, through that pure consciousness in that way. It's just a very natural process to take place. So I think I'll leave my words there and take some questions if anybody has any questions. Yes.
Whoops. Okay, now we're on air. Would you say that in the 5 aggregates, in relation to perceptions, would they be very close to judgments? So if you're trying to perhaps be aware or catch yourself forming a perception, would you be on the right track if you were catching yourself making a judgment?
Yeah, and I think perceptions are very much like that, aren't they? They are sort of making a judgment on maybe it's not so conscious, but unconsciously there are, that when a perception forms, your mind is sort of going in a certain way. So yes, you're certainly you're on the right track there. And if you can catch that, if it's a perception that's going to be positive for you, well and good, you can sort of let that be. But if it's a perception that because oftentimes perceptions of things can be quite wrong, can't they? It's just the conditioning just causes us to perceive maybe something in a certain way, but it can be totally off the mark. And if we can start to develop enough wisdom to notice when our perceptions are astray, it's a great thing to be able to just to pull yourself back and say, maybe I can see this, maybe I can start this differently before the feelings even come. The feelings come and then the actions or whatever else sort of follows on from there. But just, the perception, I don't like that person, or, this is all the negative things that happen like that. Yeah, if you can be aware of that, you're just so much better off.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Right? Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis. I'd just like to express my gratitude to having this incredible, sublime freedom, that stillness of the mind through the meditation. It is just pure bliss. And both Wendy and I, we just, we go home and we go home in a bubble of joy, and it's beautiful. And we're so grateful that we're able to experience that. Thank you.
Well, that's good. It sounds great. May it stay with you for a long time. Okay, well, I think we'll call it a night, and we'll pay our respects to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha.